Good morning. How we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And today I want to have a conversation with you about exploitation in poker. Now, clearly in the real world, exploitation or exploiting someone is a very negative thing. But at the poker table, when we're all there voluntarily, everything is about exploitation. I'm trying to exploit you, you're trying to exploit me, I'm trying to protect myself from being exploited as best as possible. This is what's really going on at the end of the day at the poker table. So what I want to talk about are kind of the four key ways that we look to exploit people in poker, the way that exploitation really exists in this game, so that way you can make sure that one, you're able to run these things and you're looking for these things within your own game, and number two, again, you can look to protect yourself to make sure you're not allowing other people to exploit you with any sort of relative ease. So let's start by laying out a functional definition of exploitation in poker. So essentially, if someone has any strategic shortcomings in their game, any range shortcomings, any frequency shortcomings, and we take advantage of those shortcomings, then that is exploiting at the end of the day. It's very simple, right? So a simple example is someone bluffs too much. How do we exploit them? We bluff catch more liberally. If someone folds too much, we exploit them by bluffing into them more liberally and taking advantage of the fact that they fold too often. Some exploits are much easier than others. Some are much cheaper than others. Some will require a lot of exposure. For instance, someone might have a situation where they play pre-flop flop and turns really well, but they play rivers pretty awfully, and they fold too much on rivers. Well, that's great, but you're going to have to expose a lot of chips in order to run that triple barrel bluff and take advantage of their exploit. The exploit's still there, it's just going to cost us a little bit more than, say, someone who folds too often against 3-bets, and we can just 3-bet for a small amount, pick it up, and take advantage that way. So these exploits are everywhere in this game. And you may be wondering, well, how does this compare with everyone discussing GTO nowadays, right? Everyone's talking about GTO, game theory optimal play, using GTO solvers. So which is more important? And this oftentimes kind of spirals into this conversation of, okay, am I in the GTO camp or am I in the exploitative camp? And at the end of the day, GTO is great. It's good to understand what GTO ranges look like, but your opponents almost certainly, and actually guaranteed, are not using GTO strategies perfectly. Nobody, no human is perfectly GTO. Just factor that in. If anyone ever says, I play perfect GTO, you can literally laugh in their face because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay, so no one is perfectly GTO, and if no one is perfectly GTO, then inherently there are pockets in their game that you can exploit. Again, some players have smaller pockets, other players have huge pockets, right? Really fishy players, tons of different ways you can exploit them. But other players, really strong regs, yeah, they have some places where you can exploit them, but they might be fewer and farther in between, but at the end of the day, they're still there. So exploitative play is still my major focus. Why? Because everyone has shortcomings in their game. Somewhere. It's my responsibility to figure out what they are and to appropriately make strategic responses to exploit them and take advantage of their shortcomings, and again, try to protect myself and make sure that I'm not allowing them to exploit me as much as humanly possible. Okay, so with all that preamble out of the way, let's talk about the four key types of exploitation that we have in poker. And by the way, I'm getting these directly from Jones's pro video called Exploitation Fundamentals, and they are as follows. Increasing aggression versus folders, increasing aggression versus non-folders, overfolding versus aggression from nits, and defending versus over-aggression. So increasing aggression versus folders is very easy, and this is something we do a ton when we're bluffing or we're looking to bluff more, right? So this is where we might say, okay, someone is opening this range of hands, but if I 3-bet them, they're going to continue with a very small range, and as such, fold a tremendous amount of the time. That's awesome. We take advantage of them by 3-betting more bluffs. And we find this with bluff C-bets, we find this with double barrels, we find this with triple barrels. And this is where we have to know our numbers very well. And the break-even number is what you have to know here. So for instance, if you were to throw out a pot size bet, how often does your opponent need to fold for you to make automatic profit? Okay, if you don't know that, I have a full video, I'll leave that in the description box down below, but essentially risk divided by risk plus reward. If you're risking pot, means your break-even number is 50%. If your opponent's, say, going to fold 75% of the time, you only need them to fold 50, they're going to fold 75, you make profit. That's really easy. Whenever you identify situations where your opponents are folding too much, again, this is a great time to increase aggression, increase your bluffs, take advantage of them. But this requires two major things, right? You have to know your break break-even numbers first and foremost, and then secondly, you have to understand your opponent. Do they actually have that frequency issue? Do they actually have this range? Do they have a range of hands they will actually fold enough for the time? If yes, pull the trigger and take advantage. And again, this is typically one where you're going to be the one putting the aggression, you're going to be putting in those raises, and you're going to be looking for spots where you say, you know what, they're folding here too often, and I'm going to take advantage by pulling that trigger because mathematically it's going to make me money in the long run. And that's the key thing here, is you can exploit someone and it will work in the long run, but in this exact hand, maybe they end up waking up with the top part of the range. That is what it is. It doesn't necessarily mean you made a mistake. If all your assumptions in the math said this is good, then it's good. But make sure that you know these things beforehand, otherwise you're just going to be running a lot of bluffs with a lot of uncertainty, and that can become a very, very expensive guessing game, and it's not really exploiting anyone other than yourself. So again, make sure you have your assumptions, make sure you know your basic math, and then go forward from there. Now, the second type of exploitation that you're really going to want to become familiar with is increasing aggression against non-folders. Now, against folders, we're looking to bluff a tremendous amount of time, but when it comes to increasing aggression against non-folders, we're really looking to expand our value range. So this means value betting thinner than we may have otherwise. So a lot of people get very, very comfortable with, okay, I'm going to use top pair, top kicker, and all hands better than that as my value range, and that's pretty comfortable for them. But if someone is not folding very often and they're getting very sticky with second pair, with top pair really crappy kickers, with third pair, with whatever it be, then this is a situation where we can definitely take advantage and start value betting thinner than we were before. Now, in your head, you might be saying, okay, well, this applies on the river, and you're 100% right, but this can also apply earlier in the hand as well, getting more aggressive on flops and turns and taking advantage of people who are too inelastic with draws is another key way of doing this, rather than taking more of a showdown value approach, letting them actualize their draws for cheaper. And of course, as I'm sure you can already see, there's a lot of details that can go into this, right? There's going to be bet sizing and raise sizing every step of the way. When we're talking about against people who fold too much, that's knowing our break-even numbers. But here it's understanding the inelasticity, exactly how much they will pay with those second best hands, and then again, trying to proof and estimate EV lines on the fly in your head. So you could say, okay, this line is probably going to be better, this size is probably going to be better, and then going forward from there. The third type of exploitation is overfolding against nits. Now, clearly this is easy. If a nit decides to double barrel, chances are they have a very, very strong hand, and as such, we can start letting go of hands that against a lot of players we would have given action with, say top pair, but against this person, you know that their range is going to be far too strong, and we exploit them by making these folds, by getting out of hands properly and not allowing them to value bet us to death. Now, this can be done against nits, but this can also be done against people who have nitty ranges. So for instance, say a strong tag, who you wouldn't classify as a nit, but they actually have a very, very nitty river check raising range, right? And this is a situation where people tend to underbluff a lot of the time, and this person decides to check raise you on the river. Well, if you think that range is very, very nitty, very, very strong, then again, there are certain hands you could probably get rid of and exploit the fact that they are far too nitty, they don't have enough bluffs in their range, they don't have a proper balance to their game. You make money by making that adjustment. But again, you have to be very, very confident here, you have to be very sure, because especially if you're going to start making these big, strong hero folds, you better be very, very certain that their ranges are as nitty as you think they are. If they aren't, you could actually be the one that's getting exploited because now you are actually overfolding. So again, you can see how all of this starts to cycle back together, both in terms of taking advantage of people who have these issues and making sure that we don't start to slip into some of these issues ourselves. And then the fourth and final type of exploitation here is looking at defending against over-aggression. So this is someone who bluffs too often, who just has too much nonsense in their ranges, is probably too wide in a lot of spots. This is someone that we can exploit by bluff catching more often, by giving them action more often. And this doesn't just have to be by defending with a call. There are certainly situations where, say, they bluff check raise the flop, and you're like, well, that's pretty darn weak, and you can just come over the top and 3-bet them right there. You're still defending. Defending just means you're not folding. Oftentimes people think of defense as strictly a calling thing, but really it just means you're not folding, and you can defend and get aggressive and come over the top as well. Now, these spots are everywhere. People oftentimes have issues in their c-betting propensity, right? They typically tend to be over aggressive there and c-bet too often, and this can be a great situation to attack them and exploit them. And you can do that by raising the flop, you can do that by floating the flop and betting the turn when they check to you, you could do this by raising the turn when they double barrel, barrel. There are lots of different ways and lines that are available to exploit this person and this issue, but this is something that you definitely need to be on the lookout for. And you can start to see how you can make some big strategic adjustments. So let's just take an example where someone decides to c-bet the flop and you think they're c-betting far too often. Let's just say you think they're c-betting every single flop regardless. They're just always going to fire this flop. Okay, what are some options you have available to you? Well, you could float the flop, and if they double barrel the turn, you have to ask yourself, okay, do they have a nitty turn barrel issue, right? Do they only really barrel the turn with a very, very strong range, really not a balanced amount of bluffs, and their frequency is way, way off in terms of how often they bet versus check the turn? Well, if that's the case, when they bet, they're too strong, and you can take advantage by folding more often and taking prices with your draws. If they decide to check the turn, which you think they're going to do a lot of the time, chances are they're probably not going to have a super great check-raise range on the turn. They're probably not going to have a super great check-call range on the turn, so you take advantage of them by betting because their checking range is too weak. So you can see how all of these really start to kind of fit together and allow you to make some big strategic adjustments. But you notice all of this still hinges on the hand reading part, on the assumptions you're making, and making sure you understand what a good baseline strategy looks like and when and how you should deviate from that. And knowing these 4 pillars of exploitation can really help you find extra lines and profit at the table that a lot of other people simply are just not looking for and nowhere near aware of. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this, especially when it comes to the hand reading part and going from the hand reading and assumptions into a legitimate strategy and learning how to make exploitative plays on the fly, I would definitely suggest checking out my live group coaching session that I'm doing on February 28th, exclusively for pro members at Red Chip Poker. If you're already a pro, awesome, you can register right now for your dashboard. If you're not, now is the absolute best time to do so. Just go to splitsuit.com/pro. It'll take you right to the checkout page, lock up your seat, and you are good to go, and I'll see you on February 28th. And by the way, if you're watching this way after I've already done this group coaching session, no problem at all. Again, it will still be available for pro members. Just go in the main navigation. Once you're a pro, go to pro and then go to group coaching, and you'll find it down below. So if you need anything or you have any questions on this, please don't hesitate to let me know. If you have any questions about the group coaching session, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, hopefully this helps a lot. Again, our major goal here is to understand how we can be exploiting players, what we should be looking for, how we can make sure that we're not falling into these traps of being easily exploited, and what we can be doing to have better and stronger frequencies and ranges, and overall a more profitable strategy at the end of the day. So again, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. And as always, good luck out there and happy grinding. Kitty cat break. And now say hello. This way, ding dong. What are you doing? What are you doing? There you go. Good girl.